Hello, and welcome to the debut episode of the Mini Albums podcast by Zigentala. I am Lilith, your host today, tomorrow, and hopefully until the end of time. I am so excited to finally be recording this episode. This is the fourth time I've recorded it, and hopefully the final time. And yeah, this is the debut episode, guys. So if you don't already know, I am the artist and designer behind the mini album series online, which is basically a project I've put together where I've been painting different mini albums on a denim tote bag. And I've been doing it for a year now, just a little bit over a year, and have been surprised and grateful for the community it has built. For a while now, I've been thinking of ways that we can sort of develop a conversation about music because it's something that I'm very passionate about, and yeah, naturally I just thought of a podcast, so that has brought me up to this point, and yeah, I'm really excited to show you guys. Hopefully this is the start of something new. So I will have like a podcast trailer that you can listen to that'll go more into detail about sort of who I am and my background, because I know a lot of you will know me as a visual artist and a designer because of my accounts Zigentala online, but I am also a musician and a composer, and I have been for a very long time. I have been inactive over the last, say, 5 or 6 years, unfortunately, but I always knew I was going to somehow come back to music, and I feel like this podcast is a little bit of an alleyway into that. But yeah, I'm very passionate about music, and I've been very inspired by all of the conversations that are happening in the comments of the videos I post online, all the videos that I'm painting these mini albums. And so I just thought that maybe we could extend that conversation and I could create a podcast, and you guys can also interact with this as well. I really want to be able to talk to you, because the great thing about our community is that I have found people that have really liked the albums I've painted. Some of you haven't though, and that's great. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But I just think it's a really interesting thing to talk about. So that's why I'm here. Welcome to the first podcast episode. I'm really excited to have you here, whether you're listening in your car or if you're watching this on YouTube. So yeah, I will be releasing this as a podcast on Spotify and the Apple podcasts as well, and I will also be uploading a video onto my YouTube. So there are lots of different places that you can listen to this podcast. So yeah. So with this podcast, what I really want to do is I want to be talking about an album per episode, and I really want your guys' input as well. And yeah, I basically want to talk about the album, sort of deep dive into the album, and then I sort of want to relate it to something of the time or within the context of when it was released. And that can range from many things. It could range from, did the album pioneer a certain genre? Was it polarizing? Did it start a trend of a particular sound? Was the band doing something cool around that time? Or like, what social political issues were reflected in that album? To me, music is a form of art, and I feel like art has always been a very big reflection of the time, its people. And yeah, I think that that's also a really interesting thing I like to look into when I'm discussing music. So that's basically what I want to do. And we're going to be starting off today by deep diving into the album Days by The Gorillaz. It's a creative masterpiece. I feel like it was ahead of its time. I feel like it's an amazing concept album. And then I'm going to talk to you guys about what I think about it. Then we're going to be looking at some of the things that you have sent in about your thoughts on the album. And then I also want to talk about concept albums in general and how I think that they are the lifeblood behind music or contemporary music today, and how, unfortunately, I feel like this type of album is essentially dying based on the way that we're interacting with technology and the way that our listening habits have changed. So yeah, that's what you can expect from this episode. I hope you find it interesting, and if you have anything else to say or add, please do so in the comments. Alright guys, let's start. So, Days by The Gorillaz. Sorry, I just need my notes. I need my notes so I can look at them, read them, get overwhelmed, and then not follow them. That's why I need notes. Okay, here we go. So Days is the sophomore album by a virtual band concept called The Gorillaz. The Gorillaz is a collaborative project between Damon Albarn, a member of the British band Blur, and graphic designer Jamie Hewlett, who is also the creator of Tank Girl. Demon Days was released in May 2005 by Parlophone and Virgin Records. It boasts a very impressive line of contributors, including Danger Mouse as a producer, and performances by Booty Brown, Shaun Ryder, Roots Maneuver, MF Doom, Martina Topley Bird, and more. In 2005, the year it was released, Demon Days was one of the top 5 best-selling albums in the UK, alongside Back to Bedlam by James Blunt, X and Y by Coldplay, Intensive Care by Robbie Williams, and Employment by the Kaiser Chiefs. So that's just like a general snapshot in time. So you can sort of just try and figure out what the time of the music was and what other people were sort of listening to. So before we even get into the album itself, I just want to say that the concept of a virtual band to me is just absolute creative genius. I think it's such a creative and innovative way to be able to push something like music, which would traditionally be pushed by an artist or a band, but to have this visual art that is sort of the forefront of the music, I think opens up so many possibilities for the creator to, create storylines and plots and sort of other complexities, which can create the possibility of universe building, which is something that I think we see a lot with the Gorillaz in general. And if you followed me, you will see that I obviously paint albums on a denim tote bag, but I also really like music. So I've always in my life had this sort of battle between art and music and sort of what I should devote my life to. And I feel like something like a virtual band is just like the perfect marriage of both of those disciplines, because not only are you able to appreciate the music, but you can also appreciate the world building that went into creating the characters and creating their appearances and their designs and their backstories. And that's something that's very much a part of what the Gorillaz are. And you can see a lot of extensions being made to their universe and world with each of the albums that they release. It is one of my biggest life goals to be a part of a virtual band project. The creative choices and possibilities are just like, there is no limit to it, and I think it would just be such an amazing thing to do, especially looking at albums like Demon Days and looking at the way that you can really push a narrative that can bring up a lot of themes and that can really create a unique sonic footprint. And so while it is a piece of art and something that you have created as an artist, it can also be quite an amazing vessel to sort of push topics and push people to have conversations about the things that you're creating. Basically, the way I see Demon Days is this. I feel like Demon Days sort of really develops the unique sound that the Gorillaz were creating in their debut album and really sort of solidifies it through different genres and different influences. It takes a lot of risks. There are lots of contributors, and I just feel like it has just created such a monumental album. Albarn did do an MTV interview and said that Gorillaz create dark pop, and that Demon Days was supposed to be music, sort of like the soundtrack to an endless night. And I think reflected in that album, you've got a lot of themes and political issues that are so relevant today. You've got things like the political turmoil and violence in Dirty Harry and Kids with Guns, and then you've got sort of dystopia in Every Planet We Reach is Dead and Last Living Souls, and then you've got this sort of ecological warfare and the results of it in Fire Coming Out of a Monkey's Head, and then you've also got a lot of existentialism and sort of depressive introspections with a lot of the other songs as well. So in itself, I think it's a very dark album, and you can sort of, at least for me, when I listen to it, you can really sort of conceptualize that darkness, because the album does play off a lot of gritty, sort of glitchy sounds, and a lot of the influences have come from subcultures. So you've got lots of influences from alternative rock, you've got electronic music, you've got hip hop, trip hop, you've got influences also from cinematic music, I think, as well, and world music. It's just a massive amalgamation of a lot of different sounds. And I think that Alban really masterfully put all of these sounds together to create this sort of darkness within the album. But I think that he was also really able to balance it out by signaling innocence, and I think that's done a lot through visual cues, so like the music videos, and I also hear that sonically within the composition and music production elements. I mean, and this is sort of what a concept album is. It's, you know, it sort of creates emphasis of the collection of songs together, and that emphasis is a lot more strong rather than the songs as like an individual standalone song. One of those examples is Feel Good Inc., which was the first single that was released from this album. I don't know if you can think back to the first time that you heard this song, but it's like, okay, yeah, like it's a really sort of bass heavy song. The bass line is amazing. You've got the rap part of it as well. It's this really sort of percussive, different alternative track. And I think it did really well when it came to like the single, it playing on the radio and being, you know, it did really well as a song. But then like within the context of the album, I feel like it just has like a completely different meaning, or at least it sort of builds off of the themes that it delves into in the album. And it's funny because I've only just really started to interpret Feel Good Inc. as a massive reflection on the way that feeling good has been commercialized a lot. And I feel like that is just so relevant today. And it's because of all of these different songs, like say Dirty Harry, that's talking about, you know, gun violence and sort of like questioning political intervention in different countries. And then you've got all of these other tracks that are sort of talking about like this creation of a dystopian landscape, and this is what we're living in. And then when you listen to a song like Feel Good Inc. within the narrative of the album, I think it really shows how we are today, and that is that even though there are so many things that are happening in this world, there are so many problems, we still have just this push to feel good all the time. And it's almost like it's a way we're trying to mask or even try and distract ourselves from all of the stuff that's happening around us. So I feel like even that song within the collection of the album itself is so much more of a stronger statement, because I think it's really just sort of showing that, yeah, even though there are a lot of these things that are happening around us, there is still this push to feel good. There are still these products that are trying to be sold to you, to tell you, to show you that, oh, happiness is just one click away. It's, you just need to buy this. You just need to do this. You just need all of these things to be happy. It's fine. And yeah, even just like the name of the song Feel Good Inc., I think also shows a reflection of how this desire to feel good, this dopamine hit, is something that has been commercialized and is something that we're constantly chasing, even now with the presence of social media and the presence of things that give us such fast gratification. That's one of the examples of Feel Good Inc. existing as a single, and then Feel Good Inc. existing within the album of Demon Days. You can also see that with a lot of the other singles as well. Dirty Harry is another one, like amazing dance beat. I love the synths in the song. I love how the electronic music has been coupled with like the kids choir. And yeah, when you heard it on the radio, it was just like, oh my god, it's just this amazing, really cool beat that you can dance to. It sounds amazing. And then like listening to it within the context of Demon Days, it's like, oh, okay, like it's just another one of those topics that Alban touches on. And like I said before, there is this inherent darkness that is being pushed visually and sonically. But I think it's also very well balanced with this sort of signaling of innocence and lightness and almost hope. And some of those examples include, I mean, visually, they're very easy to sort of spot. You know, you've got like things like even in the Feel Good Inc. music video, you've got 2D and Murdoch just banging around in what looks like a dingy club, and it's in the middle of this dystopian cityscape. There's lots of dark, gritty imagery, and you get that feeling from it. And then when it cuts to the chorus, it cuts to Noodle, you know, just playing an instrument. I don't know if it's a guitar or a ukulele, just playing an instrument on a floating island in the sun, just flying in the sky. Or you've got the music video in Dirty Harry where the members are driving through the desert. The war themes are sort of coming out visually, but then there's also this presence of children, just a group of these kids that are obviously to sing the song as well. Or you've got Dare, where it's like this very magical, whimsical visual scene of Noodle dancing around in her bedroom, as you would when you were a child. Because I think Noodle is a child. I don't think her actual age has been disclosed, but I think she's like a child. I think that's her character. And she's just dancing around in her bedroom, and then all of a sudden you've got this robotic head of Shaun Ryder in the corner. I remember watching that when I was younger, being like, why? Why did they ruin it? Why did they ruin it by inserting this head in the room? But like, that's an example of that sort of playing off of that darkness and lightness. And I think they do that as well a lot in the production elements. And it's like what I said before. There's a lot of these influences that are coming from music that have been derived from subcultures. So they're much more darker, grittier. You've got like, the songs are very bass heavy, there's lots of percussion, there's lots of rap, there's lots of glitchy sound effects happening. And Alban really masterfully creates an amazing texture and layer within the tracks of all of these elements. But then occasionally you will hear the insert of other instruments that would typically signal, like happiness or lightness, like a string ensemble or a church choir. Or maybe the track changes from its really heavy percussive beat to light guitar picking. And that happens in quite a lot of the tracks. One of the examples is the second track of the album, so Last Living Souls. You've got some electronic beats, you've got some synths, you've got these glitchy sound effects that are creating this beautiful texture of percussion almost. And then all of a sudden when it gets to like halfway through the song, I'm not really sure whether you can count it as a bridge. All of a sudden, all of that gets stripped back and it's guitar plucking and it's Alban singing a more melodic line. And then there's strings that come in and a piano starts playing this beautiful flowy harmony. And it's just really interesting having that inserted into a song that established a much different sound at the beginning. It also happens in White Light as well, where it's sort of like an alternative rock influence of a song. You've got these guitar parts, you've got lots of distortion, you've got a distorted voice singing, and it sort of creates this dark, distorted track. And then once it hits around about the 1 minute mark, all of a sudden, all of these elements get stripped back, and you're listening to 30 seconds of guitar, acoustic guitar, and vocal reverbs just in the middle of the song. And then it goes back into that alternative distorted sound again, which is just random. That's one of the things I think is one of the challenges when people do listen to this album, especially the first playthrough, is that I feel like sometimes the change between all of these different elements and influences and, you know, these different ensembles coming in and out, I think it's very Gorillaz, and it happens a lot as well in Plastic Beach, but I think it can be quite alienating and overwhelming for some people, especially if you're used to listening to contemporary music where there is a formula to it and there's a typical song structure that most people follow. Listeners are able to give their trust to the artist by knowing sort of where the song is going to go. But I feel like there is that alienation that happens within the album. I really like it, and I think that's one of the reasons why I personally really love listening to psychedelic music, because I think they do the same thing. Sometimes it can be really weird. They can have all of these sort of elements coming into a song, and they can have different song structures, but I think it's really thought-provoking, and it also pushes music beyond the function of just something that you listen to and something that's pleasant and something that your ear knows where it's going to end, and it pushes it beyond that and more into something that really drives a message or a story or a narrative. You do see this push and pull with the darkness and the lightness within the production elements as well in All Alone, which is actually one of my favorite tracks on the album, and it's the same. It sort of establishes this sound of, it's a very sort of hip-hop influence. There's this really heavy sort of percussion and bass. You've got rap verses coming in, you've got samples, you've got these electronic synths, and then all of a sudden, again to like the halfway mark of the song, all of a sudden the music seems to ascend up and all of these gritty elements get stripped back, and all of a sudden it's strings and it's these bubbly, glitchy sounds, but they're more sort of heavenly like. And then Martina Topley Bird comes in and she's singing this beautiful melody with her really airy voice, and it's just like the mood and the feel of the song just sort of ascends and switches up to something completely different, and then it gradually comes back again. It's just really interesting listening to that and just wondering sort of the creative choices that went into that, and like the thought process, why are these songs created in this way. And I think one of the reasons is because Demon Days is sort of like a soundtrack to the story that's being told within the album. And I think very much like a movie soundtrack, the sound needs to be constantly evolving with the constant evolution of the story. And I think that's what happens in Demon Days, and it happens within the songs itself. Like I mentioned before, you've got this push and pull between like these different ensembles that are creating like different moods and different thoughts within a song, but also within the track listing itself. You've got this narrative that sort of gets built up and then changes throughout the time. You know, you listen to the first track, I think it's called Intro, yeah. And it opens up with this soundscape. It's like this city soundscape. You can hear these sirens in the background. You can hear these distorted voices. And then there's also this bass clarinet playing this ominous line, which makes you think that, yeah, we're sort of in like this ominous setting. And it sort of opens up and establishes the mood of the album. And I think it's only like 2 minutes long. And then that goes into Last Living Souls, and we sort of get taken on this journey where the darkness sort of gets established. You've got songs like Kids with Guns, and then Dirty Harry sort of evolving into then Feel Good Inc. and the sort of introspections of like everything that's happening. And then, you know, towards the end of the album, you've got tracks like Dare, which are a little bit more synth pop or more pop, and it's more disco. And then after the track Fire Coming Out of the Monkey's Head, which I think is like the track that shows like the ultimate result of everything, because it sort of shows the end of the civilization that's being told in the song, but I feel like it's also quite symbolic within the album. And then the last two tracks, Don't Get Lost in Heaven and Demon Days, are a lot more airy. They adopt less of the sound from the beginning of the album, which is, you know, these very bass heavy, percussive heavy tracks, lots of synths, and instead it's church choirs, and the tempos are a lot more slow. Ensembles within the songs are a lot more lighter, and I think that sort of signals this ascension that sort of happened. It's like you've gotten to the end of that bad dream and you've woken up, or you've just gotten to the end where you've sort of ascended to heaven, or there's this sort of resolution and this conclusion. I think it really sort of is like a journey listening to Demon Days, and I really think it just shows the art of creating an album like that and being able to create this narrative that comments on so many different things that are still very relevant today, but also being able to make that sonically interesting and have so many different contributors and have so many different sounds come in. Like, it's, as I said before, quite alienating, but I love it, and I think it's a great album. So, now I'm going to be going into a couple of what you guys have said, and first and foremost, I'd just like to say that I'm absolutely blown away by the response I got from the story that I posted about a week ago about wanting you guys to essentially have more of an input in the podcast, and I want to know your ideas and I want to discuss them. And I was expecting to get like maybe 5 or 6 replies, maybe, and I ended up getting close to like 70 replies, and I read through each one. And it was just really interesting seeing what you guys had to say. Overall, in general, you all seem to have been in favor of me saying that it's a very narrative-rich album. It's very ahead of its time. A lot of you were sort of affirming that. There was also a lot of comparison to Plastic Beach as well. But yeah, I'm just going to go into a couple. I can't read them all out, obviously. But Chris Cornell, Love of My Life, says, very futuristic and very nostalgic. Toddy Kirk says, a masterpiece, and that's saying something considering how good their self-titled was. Which is interesting, because I would have thought, I haven't listened to their self-titled as much as I've listened to Demon Days, but I have listened to it, and I find the sound a little bit more... I don't want to use the word basic, but that's sort of what I'm alluding to. It's a little bit more stripped back. I think with Demon Days, there were a lot more risks being taken, and I feel like that's part of the success of why the album was able to create such a genre-defying sound. Dog Traditions 06 says, 8 out of 10 album, but honestly, Plastic Beach is much better, which I can totally respect. We'll probably have to talk about Plastic Beach at some point, which I'm already very excited to delve into. Gooey Corsino says, I think it was their peak. Purple Injector says, this album means more to me than any other. The stories they tell and memories I have listening to them. McCank says, please include in this episode the board you designed in this style with my portrait. I love it so much. So that's actually one of my friends, and I'm going to just quickly insert here, actually. So back in 2013, I actually painted a snowboard, an old snowboard, and I painted a portrait of 5 of my friends, and I did it in the cartoon style of Gorillaz, because I was honestly a massive fan back then, still am now. So yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll probably just insert a picture of the board design, but if you're not, you'll have to come and find the video if you want to see the snowboard design, sorry. Dustin Frericks says, loved it. He progressed so much from his days with Blur. I think he's talking about Albon here. Wasn't a fan of Blur at all. Gorillaz woo-hoo. And that's an interesting comment, because I think that I don't remember where I read this, but it was an interview, and Albon was saying that the Gorillaz project actually gave him a lot more freedom in regards to some of the things that he wanted to pursue musically, and a lot of it was like percussion and like these beats that he couldn't really sort of put into the Blur music. So I think that's really cool that you get to see another side to an artist within like another style of music or genre. Pretentious Moth says, totally agree. The Gorillaz were way ahead of their time and pretty much completely changed the way people see bands, music, lore, and beats. Love pretty much every track on this album. Amazing first choice. Santi Robles says, I love it. It's a spectacular album, but the best is Plastic Beach. So we got another vote for Plastic Beach there. Actually, wouldn't that be a really good thing to do with the podcast, is maybe we don't necessarily have to talk about one album in each episode, but we can even talk about like maybe not pitting 2 albums against each other, but like comparing 2 albums. You know, I feel like that would really sort of start more of a conversation, because then people can choose what they like in favor of, you know, the artist's career. La021 says, I hate it, which is fair enough. It's not for everyone. I definitely would say that. Okay, so one user says, agree, it's my favorite album of all time, plus I think it's underrated and deserves more recognition. One user says, it's one of those albums that you can listen a straight week on repeat and not get sick of it, which has basically been me over the last 2 weeks. I've been so obsessively listening to this album, trying to like pick out the little bits and pieces I can get from the songs, just trying to make this episode very rich in regards to not just touching on, oh, these are the singles and this is this, but more being like, this is the music, this is the idea, these are the themes. One user says, I'm wearing a Demon Days shirt right now. Which, amazing. I actually need a Gorillaz t-shirt. I don't have one. One user said, it's such a great mix of genres and it's a great gateway to get into other types of artists. Another person says, love Demon Days. It proved that Gorillaz was not a one album band and that their music not only evolved but still stayed unique enough that you knew it was the Gorillaz sound. The album was, like you said, ahead of its time and nothing was really like it during the early 2000s. And yeah, I completely agree with that. Because there's also a lot of comments here about how it's very nostalgic and it reminds you of like being a child and a kid, and I just wanted to insert in here. I actually think that's also one of the strengths that the Gorillaz had, was that they were a cartoon band, and I think that for a lot of us that were, a lot more younger when they became big, there was sort of like that extra sort of engagement from kids because it was communicated, like the album was communicated through cartoons, which isn't exclusively for children, but it's a very popular medium to do so. And for example, I even remember when I was younger, I would watch Rage on Saturday mornings. And if you're not Australian, I will explain it to you. So it was basically a music video program that started at some ungodly hour on Saturday morning. I think it was like 5 a.m. or maybe 6 a.m. Not quite sure. But you would basically get up and it would show like a countdown of the top hottest music videos over the space of 2 or 3 hours. So it'll go until like 9 a.m. So if you were a kid in the 2000s and you hadn't hit puberty yet, so you didn't really know what a sleep-in was, you were getting up at 6 a.m. on Saturdays and you were watching these music videos. Because as well, this was the only time and place you could watch music videos. There wasn't any... I think YouTube was around, but it wasn't established as a place you could watch music videos. And, the internet hadn't really fully formed. So the only way that you could watch these videos was, either through Rage or whether you had like cable TV and you could just switch it to, one of those music channels that would play music videos 24/7. But that was the only way that you could watch music videos. And I remember getting up and I remember through the array of videos in the mid 2000s. So, everyone's in clubs, everyone's dancing, there's lots of sexualized women and music and outfits. And in between all of these, I remember seeing Feel Good Inc. or, Dare and being like, just thinking like, oh, this is a music video for me because I'm a kid and this is a cartoon. And like for me, I was specifically hooked on these videos because I was like, oh, like it's something that's actually interesting. Like it's something, a cartoon. It's not, people partying. Because obviously as a kid, I was like, why are people doing that? I don't understand. So yeah, I think growing up with albums like Demon Days by the Gorillaz, I think it sort of adds that extra nostalgia because it was a cartoon. And I think, at least for me, I was, as I said, quite hooked because cartoons are fun and cartoons are for kids. And so the last one, Gorillaz is just unlike any other band and paved the way for so much uniqueness, Demon Days being the pinnacle. Admittedly, I get bored on some of the tracks, but overall incredible. Definitely ahead of its time, good for concentration too. Concentration? Are you listening to this while you're studying? I don't know if I could do that. I feel like for me it would be the opposite. This album would distract me so much because there's just so much going on. But each to their own. So yeah, that's what you guys had to say about it. Obviously, I cannot read out everyone's, but it's really good to be able to get that contribution from you guys. And then just quickly, concept albums. The reason I wanted to rant about Demon Days, obviously because it was the first album I painted on my denim tote bag, and this is the Mini Albums podcast, but also because I feel like it's these types of albums that are the lifeblood of music. I feel like music has this really special purpose in being able to connect people and being able to infect people's ears, not only with sound, but with ideas. And that's one of the reasons why I really like music, because I feel like there is this whole psychological aspect of it and how we interpret it as humans and how we use it to tell stories and how we use it to make sure that information is preserved and how we use it to sort of come together as communities. And there are heaps of examples of that in regards to music playing a function within cultures. And it's just really frustrating to me because I feel like this type of album or this format of album is probably something that could save music in the future because it's still creating that function of being able to communicate ideas. And even within the context of Demon Days, it's like communicating these ideas that are very relevant today, and really starting these conversations we really need to be having, whether that's about violence, gun violence, whether that's about politics, whether that's about the deterioration of the earth, and how the hell when are we going to get around to actually facing that? So yeah, there are these issues that really need to be raised. And it is very frustrating for me to know that music has so much power in being able to spread information like this and to start very important conversations. But then knowing that most of the time now, because of the way that technology has evolved and how our attention spans have sort of evolved with it, that we're not really allowing the space for that. And it's always been like this, and I think there's always been this thing about, when MTV started and then there were music videos and then music died. And then no one was listening to albums because they were listening to singles, because you could buy the singles off iTunes, and that was bad because you couldn't listen to all of the music that the artist created. You didn't get to listen to all of the ideas that the artist wanted you to hear. You could only listen to that single. I remember old people ranting to me about that, even back in 2005, saying, oh, you'll never know what it's like to buy an album just so you can listen to that one song, and you had to listen to all the songs. And I feel like that sort of that sort of way that we interacted with music back then, with iTunes and the iTunes store and like the start of the single, I feel like that has almost escalated to the point now where it's like we don't even listen to the whole song anymore. We are more in favor of the 20 seconds, that 20-second grab from the song that went viral on TikTok, or the 20 seconds that have become a trend, and it's massive for a time, but then it just sort of dies away. And there are some exceptions. There are some exceptions of musicians that have been able to create at least moments within their career from virality in social media, and like through the form of, I feel like everything right now is short form videos. So it's about attention grabbing, and it's about being able to grab someone for what little time you have before they swipe your video up. And I feel like a lot of music has evolved, especially to that now. And I feel like even when you look at the musicians that are sort of relevant right now in the industry, there hasn't really been musicians that have created a foundation over years and have a long respected career, because I feel like record labels are sort of wanting more virality, and they're wanting more, this one song needs to take over the world. And maybe it does, but I feel like that waters music down, and it waters the power that music has down. Like, yeah, and it just makes you question, in the future, would we still have concept albums? Or would we even still have albums, if that? I really love concept albums. I love that within a collection of songs, you can really sort of push an underlying theme or an idea. And there are lots of artists and bands that have been able to do that really well. And it makes the album almost like a movie. It makes it an experience. It really makes music more immersive, even if you're not doing it within a virtual band. I feel like you can create a universe within an album, but I don't know, guys. I feel like it's a dying breed of album. I don't know if we're going to be able to... Are we going to have the listening spans for that, the attention spans for that in the future? Especially if now all we're hearing is like 20 seconds of 100 different songs, yet I couldn't tell you the artist or the name of those songs, but I know that one little catchphrase that you use, and I know what dance you have to dance to it if you want that video to go viral. It's interesting, the relationship between technology and music, and basically how that is a reflection of the society that we're in as well, and how we've changed with it and what sort of consequence that comes with. But yeah, I think I gotta leave it there now. But yeah, Demon Days. first album of the Mini Albums podcast. I'm so glad it was, and I filmed it. As I said before, I filmed this 4 times because I wanted to get it right, and I really wanted to make this hopefully a good experience for myself and for you guys. I'm really, really interested in being able to bounce ideas off of each other and just creating a community of this. So that brings us to the end of the first episode, guys. I hope you really enjoyed it. Please make sure to follow my accounts on social media. They're all at Zigentala, which is at Zigentala. That's on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Pinterest, everything, really. I don't have X or Twitter or whatever it's called. Stay tuned. I feel like the next one I'm going to do is a Queens of the Stone Age album. Please let me know what you think of this episode in the comments. I really would like to hear your opinions on the episode, on Demon Days. What do you think about it? On concept albums even. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode. Ciao.